Welcome to our deep dive into the Diwan, the collected works of poetry by Ibn Zaydun.
Oh, Ibn Zaydun.
Yeah, he was a fascinating figure from 11th century Al-Andalus, a period of incredible intellectual and artistic flourishing,
Yeah.
especially in his home city of Cordoba.
Oh, yeah.
But before we jump into his verses, what makes his poetry so captivating to you?
Well, I think one of the most fascinating things about Ibn Zaydun is that he wasn't just a poet.
Oh,
He was also very deeply involved in the political and social life of Cordoba.
okay.
His poems offer a window into not only his heart, but also a very turbulent era in Al-Andalus history.
Okay, let's unpack that.
Yeah.
We often think of poetry as this purely emotional, personal art form. But in Ibn Zaydun's case, it seems like his poetry was also a way of engaging with the world around him.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things we'll be exploring in this deep dive.
Okay.
How Ibn Zaydun uses his poetry to reflect on themes of love loss, the beauty of the natural world, and even the political realities of his time.
That's quite the range.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is.
So where should we begin this journey of uncovering the layers of Ibn Zaydun's poetry?
Well, I think a natural starting point is with his most famous theme,
Okay.
love and loss, specifically his very passionate love for Walada,
Okay.
a Cordoban princess who was also a poet.
A princess and a poet.
Yeah.
Talk about a power couple. I'm already intrigued, but I've also read that their romance was a bit scandalous for the time.
Yeah, it definitely raised eyebrows.
Okay.
Their relationship was considered forbidden due to their social standing, and you really see that tension reflected in his poetry, the push and pull between his love for Walada and the societal pressures that kept them apart.
So how does this forbidden love manifest in his poetry? I mean, does he explicitly talk about these societal pressures, or is it more subtle?
It's a combination of both.
Okay.
He uses vivid imagery and metaphors to convey the depth of his emotions and the challenges they faced.
Okay.
For example, in one poem, he writes, "My heart is with you, though fate has woven a veil between us."
Okay.
There's a clear sense of longing and frustration, but it's veiled in poetic language.
Ah, so even back then, poets were masters of subtweeting.
Well, maybe not in the Twitter sense, but yeah, you're right. He had to be careful about what he explicitly stated.
Makes sense. But this line, fate has woven a veil between us. It's so evocative, isn't it? You get a sense of his helplessness, how forces beyond his control are dictating the course of their love.
Mm.
What other images does he use to depict this struggle?
Well, he frequently uses the imagery of gardens and flowers,
Okay.
which were common motifs in Arabic poetry. But for Ibn Zaydun, these images take on a deeper meaning.
Okay.
The garden often represents their love, a paradise that's both beautiful and fragile. And the flowers, especially roses,
Yeah.
symbolize Walada's beauty, but also the fleeting nature of their time together.
I see. So he's not just describing pretty scenery.
Right.
He's using these images to convey the complexities of their relationship, the joy and the sorrow, the hope and the despair.
Exactly.
It's like emotional landscaping.
I love that emotional landscaping. It perfectly captures what Ibn Zaydun is doing.
Yeah.
He's taking these very familiar images and imbuing them with layers of meaning that reflect his own personal experience.
Okay, so we have this forbidden love, the longing, the separation, all woven together with these beautiful yet symbolic images of gardens and flowers. It's no wonder their love story became so legendary.
Yeah.
But beyond the romance, what else strikes you about his portrayal of Walada?
Her intellect, Ibn Zaydun clearly admired Walada, not just for her beauty, but also for her sharp wit and poetic talent. There's one poem where he compares her to a gazelle whose words pierce the heart more swiftly than arrows.
Wow.
He's acknowledging her power as a poet, her ability to move and inspire others with her language.
It's interesting that you point that out. I've always wondered how their roles as poets might have influenced their relationship. Was it a source of competition, or did it deepen their connection?
That's a great question, and it's one that scholars have debated for centuries.
Yeah.
Some believe that their shared passion for poetry fueled a rivalry between them, while others argue that it strengthened their bond, creating a unique intellectual and artistic connection between them.
So another layer of complexity. It makes you want to dive even deeper into their poems and try to decipher the nuances of their relationship.
Exactly. And I think that's the beauty of Ibn Zaydun's poetry. It's not just about surface-level emotions.
Okay.
It's about exploring the depths of human experience, the contradictions, the ambiguities. And he invites us to do the same, to think critically about the layers of meaning embedded in his words.
You're making me think of something else I noticed about his poetry. It's the way he uses the natural world to reflect his inner emotions.
Yeah.
It's not just gardens and flowers, but also images of the moon, the stars, the desert,
Right. He seamlessly weaves nature into his poems, drawing parallels between the physical world and his emotional state. For example, he often uses the moon as a symbol of Walada,
Okay.
her beauty and the way she illuminates his life. But he also connects the moon's cycles to their relationship, highlighting the waxing and waning of their time together.
So he's going beyond simple metaphors.
Mm-hmm.
He's using these natural elements to create a whole symbolic system that reflects the complexities of his emotions and experiences.
Exactly. And this is where his mastery of the Arabic poetic tradition really shines. He's not just using these images for their aesthetic value.
Yeah.
He's building on a rich legacy of symbolic language and poetic conventions to create something truly unique and powerful.
You know, it's funny. We often think of nature as this constant, unchanging force.
Mm-hmm.
But in Ibn Zaydun's poetry, nature becomes dynamic.
Right.
It reflects the ebb and flow of his emotions, the turmoil of his life,
Yeah.
even the political landscape of his time.
That's a great point. It's like he's suggesting that the natural world and the human world are intimately intertwined, constantly influencing and shaping each other.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another important layer of his poetry, the political commentary.
Ah, yes.
Ah,
We've talked about love and loss, nature and beauty.
right.
But we can't forget that Ibn Zaydun was also a prominent figure in Cordoban politics.
Yeah.
So how does that aspect of his life seep into his verses?
Well, it's often subtle, hidden beneath layers of metaphor and symbolism.
Okay.
Remember, this was a time of great political instability in Al-Andalus, with the once powerful Caliphate of Cordoba fragmenting into smaller kingdoms, each vying for power.
It sounds like a recipe for drama. And I'm guessing Ibn Zaydun was right in the middle of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He held various political positions, experienced both success and exile,
Wow.
and witnessed firsthand the shifting allegiances and power struggles that defined his era. And while he couldn't always be explicit about his political views,
Yeah.
his poetry offers glimpses into his perspective, his frustrations, and his hopes for a more stable and just society.
So even his love poems might have hidden political messages.
It's certainly possible,
Right.
and it's something we'll be exploring further as we delve deeper into his Diwan.
Okay, I'm officially hooked. We've got forbidden love, a poetic power. A couple layers of symbolism, hidden political messages.
Yeah.
What else awaits us in the world of Ibn Zaydun's poetry?
Well, one thing that always fascinates me is how he uses specific technical aspects of Arabic poetry to enhance his themes. Oh.
For example, classical Arabic poetry relies on very strict rhyme schemes and metrical patterns,
Okay.
which create a unique rhythm and musicality.
Oh, so there's a technical side to all this beauty.
Absolutely. And Ibn Zaydun was a master craftsman.
Yeah.
He effortlessly navigates these very complex rules, weaving together intricate sounds and meanings.
Okay.
And sometimes the way he plays with these formal elements actually reinforces the themes of his poems.
So it's not just what he's saying, but how he's saying it. The form becomes part of the message. I love that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that makes classical Arabic poetry so unique and rewarding to study.
Yeah.
And we'll be looking at specific examples of how Ibn Zaydun uses these formal elements to create a deeper impact on the reader.
Okay.
But for now, I think we've given our listener plenty to ponder. You're right. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive, from forbidden love and poetic rivalries to the symbolism of gardens and the echoes of political turmoil. Ibn Zaydun's poetry already feels so rich and multi-layered. What stands out to you so far? What images or ideas are sticking with you? Take some time to reflect, and we'll pick up the conversation in part 2.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the poetry of Ibn Zaydun. I trust you've had some time to reflect on the themes we've discussed so far.
Definitely. And I have to admit, one image that really stuck with me is that line about Walada's words piercing the heart like arrows. It makes you realize that Ibn Zaydun saw her as more than just a beautiful muse, but as a powerful force in her own right.
It is a powerful image, and it speaks to the complexity of their relationship, how their roles as poets both connected and perhaps at times challenged each other.
Speaking of challenges, I've been thinking about those subtle hints of political commentary we touched upon earlier.
Right.
How did Ibn Zaydun manage to weave those critiques into his love poetry without, getting into trouble?
It's a delicate dance, isn't it? Balancing artistic expression with the realities of living in a politically charged environment. One way he achieved this was through allegory.
Okay.
He often used stories and imagery from history or mythology to comment on current events.
So he'd tell a seemingly unrelated story, but with a hidden meaning that resonated with what was happening in Cordoba at the time.
Precisely. It allowed him to express his views without directly challenging those in power.
Okay.
For example, there's a poem where he compares the fragmentation of Al-Andalus to the mythical fall of the town, the political divisions and infighting that were weakening the region.
Wow, that's clever.
Oh.
It's like he's using these ancient stories to hold up a mirror to his own society.
Mm-hmm.
But how did his contemporaries pick up on those hidden messages?
Well, remember, this was a highly literate and sophisticated society.
Right.
Poetry was a central part of their culture,
Yeah.
and people were attuned to the nuances of language and symbolism.
Okay.
They would have recognized the parallels he was drawing between the past and the present.
That's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you realize that even back then, poetry was more than just entertainment.
Right.
It was a way to engage in political and social discourse, to spark debate, to challenge the status quo.
Absolutely. And Ibn Zaydun was a master of using poetry to do just that. He was a very keen observer of human nature and the dynamics of power, and he wasn't afraid to use his voice, even if it meant veiling his critiques in allegory and metaphor.
You know, as we're discussing this, I'm noticing another pattern in his poetry. He seems to be constantly playing with contrasts, light and darkness,
Yeah.
joy and sorrow, beauty and decay.
Yeah.
Is this something specific to his style, or is it a broader characteristic of Arabic poetry?
That's a great observation, and it's something you see throughout classical Arabic poetry.
Yeah.
This juxtaposition of opposing forces serves to highlight the complexity of human experience.
Okay.
The idea that even in the darkest moments there can be glimmers of hope,
Yeah.
and even the most beautiful things are subject to change and decay.
It's like he's acknowledging the duality of life, the bittersweet nature of existence. And it adds a certain depth and richness to his poetry, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's not just about expressing one emotion or perspective. It's
There's
about
my-
embracing the full spectrum of human experience, the good and the bad, the light and the shadow.
This reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about the technical aspects of Arabic poetry, those strict rhyme schemes and metrical patterns.
Right.
Did those formal elements also play a role in creating these contrasts?
Yes. In fact, the very structure of a classical Arabic poem often reflects this idea of duality. The most common form is the qasida,
Okay.
which has a single rhyme scheme throughout the poem, but the meter changes in the middle, creating a shift in tone and rhythm.
Wait, so even the rhythm of the poem can reflect a change in emotion or perspective?
Precisely. It's a subtle but powerful way to enhance the meaning of the words.
Wow.
And Ibn Zaydun was a master of using these shifts in meter to highlight the contrasts he was exploring in his poetry.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. It's incredible how much thought and artistry went into every aspect of these poems.
And it's this attention to detail, this
Yeah.
weaving together of form and content
Yeah.
that makes Ibn Zaydun's poetry so enduring. He wasn't just writing to express himself.
Okay.
He was crafting intricate works of art that were meant to be savored and studied.
You know, we've been talking a lot about the symbolism and the hidden meanings, but I don't want us to lose sight of the sheer beauty of his language. Some of his lines are just breathtakingly gorgeous, even without all the layers of interpretation.
You're absolutely right. His use of imagery, his ability to paint vivid pictures with words is truly remarkable. There's one poem where he describes Walada as a moon that illuminates the darkness of my night.
Wow.
It's a simple metaphor, but it's so evocative, isn't it?
It is. And it speaks to the power of poetry to capture the essence of human emotion in a way that transcends time and culture. I bet everyone listening has felt that way about someone at some point in their lives, the feeling of being drawn to someone who brings light and warmth to your world.
Exactly. And that's what makes Ibn Zaydun's poetry so relevant today. Even though he was writing centuries ago, he was exploring universal themes that resonate with us on a deeply human level.
It's like he's inviting us to look beyond the surface, to uncover the layers of meaning, to find the echoes of our own experiences in his words.
And in doing so, we not only gain a deeper appreciation for his poetry, but also a deeper understanding of ourselves.
Now, that's a powerful thought. We've talked about Ibn Zaydun as a poet, a lover, a political commentator, a master of language. But there's another aspect of his work that we haven't touched upon yet, the narrative element.
Oh, right.
Some of his longer poems, especially the ones addressed to Walada, feel like mini epics.
You're right. It's not just about static emotions or descriptions. There's a story unfolding a journey that the reader takes alongside the poet.
Take, for instance, his famous Risala, or letter poem. It chronicles his relationship with Walada from their first meeting to his eventual exile from Cordoba.
Oh, wow.
It's filled with dramatic twists and turns, moments of joy and despair, even a bit of rivalry thrown in for good measure.
And he uses such vivid language to bring the story to life. You can practically hear the whispers in the garden, feel the heat of the desert sun, taste the bitterness of his exile.
And it's not just about telling a good story. He's using the narrative form to explore those same themes we've been discussing.
Right?
Love, loss, the
Right.
complexities of human relationships, even the political turmoil of his time.
Exactly. The narrative becomes another layer of meaning, another way to engage the reader on an emotional and intellectual level.
You know, it's making me think about how poetry can be so much more than just pretty words on a page. It can be a window into history, a mirror reflecting our own humanity, a map guiding us through the complexities of life.
Beautifully said. And Ibn Zaydun's poetry offers us all of that and more. As we head into the final part of our deep dive, I want you to consider this. How does Ibn Zaydun's use of narrative enhance those universal themes we've been discussing? How does he weave together the personal and the political, the emotional and the intellectual to create such a rich and compelling tapestry of human experience? We'll explore these questions further in part 3.
We're back for the final part of our deep dive into the Diwan of Ibn Zaydun. You know, as we've been discussing his work, I've been struck by how he masterfully weaves together personal experiences with broader historical and cultural contexts. It's like each poem is a microcosm of the world he lived in.
It's a testament to his skill as a poet, but also, I think, to the very nature of poetry itself.
Right.
Poetry has always been a way for people to make sense of the world around them,
Mhm.
to process their emotions, to grapple with big ideas. And Ibn Zaydun's work is a perfect example of how poetry can transcend the boundaries of time and place, speaking to universal truths that resonate across centuries.
Okay, I want to pick up on something you just said about poetry reflecting the world around the poet. It made me think about how Ibn Zaydun drew inspiration not just from his own life and experiences,
Right.
but also from other poets who came before him. We touched upon this briefly, but I'd love to explore it further. How did those earlier poets influence his work?
Well, it's important to remember that Ibn Zaydun was very deeply steeped in the classical Arabic literary tradition.
Mhm.
He studied the works of the masters, and he wasn't shy about paying homage to them in his own poetry.
So it wasn't just about copying what they did. It was
Okay.
more about engaging in a conversation with them, building upon their legacy.
Exactly. He would often use similar themes, imagery, or even specific phrases from earlier poems,
Okay.
but he would give them a new twist, a fresh perspective that reflected his own unique voice.
Okay.
It's like he was saying, I see you great poets of the past, and I'm adding my own verse to the ongoing song of our tradition.
That's beautiful. It's like a literary relay race with each generation passing the torch to the next,
Right.
keeping the flame of creativity alive.
Exactly.
I have a confession to make. Before this deep dive, I had a somewhat limited understanding of classical Arabic poetry. I knew it was considered this high art form, but I didn't fully grasp the technical intricacies involved. And honestly, I was a bit intimidated by it all.
Yeah.
But through our conversation, I've gained a new appreciation for the level of skill and artistry that goes into crafting these poems.
I'm so glad to hear that. It's true that classical Arabic poetry has a very specific set of rules and conventions, which can seem daunting at first.
Right.
But once you understand those rules, it actually opens up a whole new level of appreciation.
Okay.
You realize that the poets weren't just following a formula. They were using those constraints to create something truly beautiful and expressive.
You know, it's making me think of jazz music. There are certain rules of harmony and rhythm, but within those boundaries, there's so much room for improvisation, for individual expression.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm starting to see in Ibn Zaydun's poetry. He's mastering the technical aspects, but he's also pushing the boundaries, experimenting with language and form to create something unique and powerful.
That's a fantastic analogy, and it really highlights the fact that even within a highly structured tradition,
Yeah.
there's always room for innovation, for individuality. Ibn Zaydun wasn't just a master of the craft. He was also a creative innovator who pushed the boundaries of Arabic poetry.
It's amazing how even after spending 3 parts dissecting his poetry, there's still this sense of, wow, there's so much more to uncover.
It's the mark of a truly great poet, isn't it? That their work continues to reveal new layers of meaning and beauty, even after centuries of study and interpretation.
Yeah.
And I think that's the ultimate takeaway from our deep dive into the Diwan of Ibn Zaydun. His poetry is a gift that keeps on giving. It's a window into a fascinating period of history, an exploration of universal themes that resonate with us today, and a testament to the enduring power of language and the human spirit.
Beautifully said.
Mm.
And as we wrap up our deep dive, I want to encourage everyone listening to continue the journey. Pick up a copy of the Diwan, read some of his poems, and let yourself get lost in the beauty and complexity of his words. Who knows what you might discover?
Perhaps you'll find a favorite verse, a new way of seeing the world, or even a spark of inspiration to create something beautiful of your own.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the vast ocean of human knowledge and creativity.